Morning, everybody. We'll just wait a couple of minutes for people to join, and then we'll kick off with the webinar. Okay, we'll start there. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the practical integrations of autonomous vehicles in public transport. My name is James West. I work for Pedal Mobility and Siemens Mobility, looking after the growth and business development of the UK and some of the Nordic countries. And I'd like to welcome today two of our speakers who are joining us for this webinar. If I can firstly introduce Adsiri Guadalupe Sanchez. Adsiri, would you like to just introduce yourself and say a few words about your role and for this project? Thank you.
Yeah, nice to meet you all. My name is Atsiri Sanchez and I work at Pada Mobility as consultant. My role was basically in the part of the feasibility study and giving some inputs about the simulations, the demand and the offer, but you will see really soon what the project is about.
Thank you, Adsiri. And also joined by Gavin Jackman, Managing Consultant for Sustainability. Gav, a few words from you as well, please.
Well, you passed the test there, James, in saying the company name correctly. Yeah, my name's Gav. As hopefully some people will know us in the audience, I've got a portfolio career, so I work for Sustainability, which is my own company, but also represent another couple of companies as well in the UK. My role was to lead, to be the project lead for the consortium, but also lead on the work package and return on investment with some colleagues of mine.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So yeah, we'll dive into our discussion and what we're presenting through today. So Devi, if we could have the next slide, please. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about a connected autonomous vehicles project that we've been working on in partnership through Innovate UK and our consortium. And the goal here today is to talk about the integrations that we've done and how that can work with public transport. Next slide, please. So yes, in terms of what we will discuss, there's kind of a key theme that Adsiri and Gav will run through and discuss with you today. So first, I'll talk a bit about the introduction to the project and how it works and a bit of the wider context. You'll then understand a bit about the methodology and the results that we achieved through some simulation work. And then kind of what does this look like going forward? And that's where, as Gav mentioned, a bit about the return on investment calculator. How much do these services cost? What does it look like? And how do we benchmark them versus traditional sort of, human-driven vehicles? Next slide, please. So just a little bit about our project. So this was part of the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, so CCAV. They ran a competition to fund a feasibility study into automated mass transit. And we wanted to sort of tie early commercial self-driving vehicle opportunities, autonomous vehicles, to see how can that support the UK and UK PLC in its supply chain to kind of assess where's the gap in technology today and what do we need in order to have a successful deployment. And so what we wanted to do was assess the potential, look at the feasibility and potential operational lifetime of services to see if it could be a commercially viable solution. Next slide, please. And so just a bit about the overview. So we looked at, is a route feasible? What are the potential obstacles for a connected autonomous service? A option around the on-demand demand responsive transport DRT for a suitable business use case and the corresponding optimization. What does the actual business case, collectively just outside of that DRT potential, and how is that compared versus the traditional methods, and what's the return on investment on that? And then what are the other technologies that are available? What's the best practice that we can use to help really make sure that building on all the technological gains that we've had in recent times to really enable this project to get the best potential that it has? Next slide, please. And Aziri, I'll hand over to you to discuss our project.
Yeah, thank you. So the first thing that we needed to delimitate is the area itself, and we needed to understand what were the needs of the users inside this business area. So what we noticed, first of all, is that there is a lot of density of business inside. So this is translated to having a lot of people having the need to commute. So that was the first thing that we realized in the territory. So this is the potential customers that we have with really marked paths of going from the train station to this business area, but without having a lot of options. Because when we see the offer that it's available, even if we have buses that are passing by or crossing the area, even if we have train station, almost 80% of the people are using the car to go to this business area, which is translated to congestion, which is translated to all the externalities that we already know. And even if we have also a DRT partially in the area, it's still not big enough to satisfy all these people's needs. And that's take us to the next slide, please. Which is why we see this opportunity for AV. So the first thing that we notice is that when people try to use the public transport to go to this business area, it can take 3 times longer than if they decided to use the car. So that explains directly why they decide to keep using the car to go. And the main reasons why, it's first of all, because we have a really low density. Even if we have options, we still have 1 bus per hour. And this is the first thing that the AVs try to tackle. So we understand that most of the PTAs and PTOs have some struggles recruiting some drivers. So at the end, even if they want to increase the offer, it's not possible because of this limit. And this limit is unlocked thanks to the autonomous vehicles. So that was the first reason. The second one is the lack of synchronization. So once we arrive to the train station, we notice that we have to wait around 20 minutes or maybe more for the next bus to arrive. So in 20 minutes, we already arrive by car. And this is part of the connected of the autonomous vehicle, because we can schedule the times and they can be also interacting with the rest of the ecosystem to understand at what time they need to leave. And the final part that makes sense for us is one of the main struggles of the fixed lines today is that we stay a lot of time in the bus. So it means a lot of onboard time for the user, which is really annoying for them. And that's why it makes sense to have on demand. So instead of doing all the stops, we're only going to do the stops that are required by the customers. We're going to do only the things that we're supposed to be done. So this reduces the time of the people on board. And at the end, these 3 key points make us to understand that AV with these on-demand systems, it makes complete sense in this specific use case. And we can go to the next slide, please. And once we notice that there is this need and it can be fulfilled thanks to the autonomous vehicle, the next part to see is the feasibility of this. And we decided to take these main roads that takes to from the train station that are close by to the industrial state, but we need to analyze if this is really feasible to be done with the technology that we have. And that's one of the things that it was part of this feasibility study. Next, please. And to build all this project, we collaborate with these different partners. All of us, we have a different role in the consortium. Some of them were partners. Some of us as PADAM, we work as subcontractors, and we give different inputs to finalize this product that it requires the help of all of different entities, not only us as on-demand providers and orchestrator for autonomous vehicles, but we need also manufacturers. We need the knowledge of some technological providers, and we need as well the help of a lead that help us to put everything together with the main ideas of the PTA as well. So can we go to the next slide, please? Once we know the problem, the next thing is that we need to provide the right inputs to the simulator. That's the main struggle with any of the studies. If we have bad data, we're going to have bad results. So the first thing that we did is to ask the PTA, can you help us to understand what is the numbers that you have today? And they provide a database who has some struggle, but we need to adapt, have some limits like all of the database that are in the market. So one of them is that the only available information was a little bit old. So we need to extrapolate some of the conditions of today. And we couldn't include all of the passengers today using the train, it was only people using the cars, which is a good input because at the end, that's the main people to target. So the people that are using cars today. And to complement this database, we use as well the information that we have today in the area about the on-demand service to understand this adoption curve, how the people are going to embrace the service when there is an app in the middle, because it can be a filter sometimes. Can we go to the next one, please? So again, if we have bad data, we're going to have bad results. So the first thing we need to do is to clean everything and to put everything in a format that it's capable to be read. So we did some assumptions. The first of all is that we don't really care about the number of vehicles using for goods, because there is not our target. So we focus in passengers, and we focus in the main reason why the people are being using this car, which is to commute. And as well, we have a huge matrix with origins and destinations. So again, we did some such assumptions to put everything as condensed as possible to be able to treat them. And that's how we achieve to have, can you go to the animation, please? Something smaller. So we went from 1,000 lines to having just 112 lines, which is more reasonable to attack and to understand and to interpret. So once we have that, this is still raw data. We pass to the hypothesis, and that takes us to the next slide. And we have to take some big assumptions because this is an innovation project, and we don't have all the information about how the people are going to react. So the first thing that we needed to do is to translate the units of the database to something that is reasonable for the project, which is passengers. We need number of passengers. Once we have that, we did assumptions about how many of these people are going to be translated to real potential customers from DRT. And once we have that, not all the people that are willing to use the DRT are willing to use the autonomous vehicles as well. So we affect as well from this percentage that is provided by the European Union. And at the end, as I said, it was a really old database, so we need to extrapolate in the population growth. So we just multiply by the fact of the people growing with the available census information that it was in the database of the government. Can we go to the next one, please? But once we have that, it doesn't mean that from the day one, we're going to have X number of passengers. It's going to take time. And from what we can see in our own experience in this same territory is that it takes around 6 months to start to stabilize the curve. So people are already using regularly the service. And we try to use this base to see how it's going to be the service in 6 months, which is going to be the number that we're going to use. Can we use the animation, please? Yeah. So again, it's more about extrapolation. So we use the information that we have already with real passengers using a real DRT service close in the area, not exactly the same use case, but still we are sharing this area and we are almost the same type of model of vehicles, and maybe it's not the same reason, but it's still having the same filters like the app, sometimes a call center. So at the end, we assume that this is going to be around the number of people per day that we will have using the system when the system is already stabilized. So that takes us to the final part of this demand model. Next slide, please. Which is the number that we need to put in the simulator. So we did 2 assumptions. One is having like only the people that decide to commute, which is around 336 passengers per day. And then we add some extra demand, taking into consideration that are some people considered as car business category, which is people that are sometimes doing home office. So they are punctual passengers, but they can appear to the system, and we need to be prepared to also respond to this demand. And it's taking us to 380 passengers per day almost. And I will let the floor to Gav, who's going to explain more about the offer part. Next slide, please.
Yes, I would just add for those that were looking at or were eagerly launching that, yes, we were using 2019 Comet Strategic Transport Model Origin Destination data. The reason being is when we started the project, which was back last January, the latest version of Comet wasn't available to us. It was in process as such. So that's the reason why we used a slightly old data set. So obviously part of the route feasibility was one looking at not only the demand, which we've gone in the background, and in a couple of slides we're going to go to actually what does that actually result as far as the simulation actually success of, but actually was, well, actually can we actually traverse that route within an autonomous vehicle? So Fusion Processing were a subcontractor of Hertfordshire County Council. And they traversed the route in both directions, and not only the route, when I say the routes, the whole triangular route, so route 1, 2, and 3, in a level 4 survey vehicle. So this wasn't in autonomous mode, this was human driven with 2 drivers. But what they did then was they basically surveyed the route with all the technology that you would have within a level 4 bus, effectively. So the vehicle was equipped with cameras, with long and medium range LiDAR, GPS and GNS, white line detector system, side-facing LiDAR, and recording equipment. So what they've done is they've done a very comprehensive report for us, and that's really useful for us in understanding. But they effectively drove the route in both directions on all 3 pieces. Next slide, please. And what that really boiled down to is a table, and there was a more detailed table, but basically a table of the key fundamental issues that would be had on each particular route. So as you can see, there's a good example on Route 1, which is at Station Way Junction South. There's a narrow lanes, and actually there's some bollards which effectively, in Route 2 at 3 Cherry Tree restriction, there's 2 bollards which restrict HEVs and anything bigger than a transit van to go down the road. So effectively, you've got an obstacle that you can't really remove. So that really kind of sort of put an issue as far as Route 2 goes. Route 1, there was really multiple issues. And so when we boil it all down, Route 3 was the best route that we could potentially use right now, and therefore was favoured from NAV. We can address the obstacles in Route 1 and 2, but obviously there was a cost. And our premise, understanding, looking at this feasibility study, was to how do we actually move this forward from a commercialization perspective, almost looking at the kind of the path of least resistance. So trying to focus on less change to infrastructure and more what could we do tomorrow if we had a vehicle level 4 capability, and what was the plausibility of that. So that's really where we focused. So Route 1 was really probably out of the question because we had too many restrictions and issues. Route 2, there was a couple that we could potentially deal with and remove at low cost. And Route 3, some improvements, but actually viable with a level 4 vehicle based on the trajectory of roadmap and technology of vehicles in the near term. And when I say near term, I mean 2025, 2026. So that's really the time that we were looking at, rather than kind of looking at 3 years out, rather than looking at now, looking at a 2-year window, whether these vehicles would be able to traverse the route. Next slide, please, and back to yourself.
Thank you. Once we have these inputs, we needed to delimitate the offer of the DRT if we wanted to do the simulation. So we decided to use 2 models of vehicles. This was provided that the subcontractor Fusion Processing, they told us that they have 2 models in different timelines as well. So we put this as an input as well, and we decided to create 3 different bus lines, what we call in PADAM bus lines. So one of the models that we decided to try, it's something that we call a feeder. So we have a fixed schedule to be or to depart from one point, and then the rest of the system is completely free-floating. And the other option that we wanted to try is the free-floating itself. Can we use the animation, please? Thank you. And that takes us to different scenarios. So the first scenario is to have smaller vehicles with a almost high frequency, because we have 7 vehicles available in the peak hours and 2 in the off-peak hours. So the goal is to give the users more options to decide which vehicle they want to deliver the service. And the second scenario was to have bigger vehicles, more densified, like mutualize the demand in one single train station. And in that case, we don't need 7, we just need 3, for example, and we will still have one vehicle available for the off-peak hour. So we have fewer options, but the demand is clustered. They are all together, and it's easier for the operator to handle this kind of situations. Next, please. And that takes us to the results. Once we put these 2 inputs in the simulator, we have the first part that we wanted to analyze is the feeder, because it's the more interesting one for most of the operators that wants to do specific cases as the business areas. So what we can see is that we have a really high success rate. What we call a success rate is when we have a number of people being served by the service versus the number of bookings that were requested. So we have a high number. We almost have the 100%, but still not capable of. And we have a really high booking rate, pulling rate as well. So we achieved to mutualize most of the passengers. So one thing that we wanted to make a focus on, and we can go to the animation, is that when we see the maximum people on board, next please. Yeah, this means that we are using the maximum capacity of the vehicles the whole time? And the answer is no. Not all the time during the peak hours, or even in this case during the peak hours, we are not using the full capacity of the vehicle all the time. So it means that potentially we don't need a single fleet, like a single size fleet all the time, because we are not using it for the whole. And we can go to the next one, please. And when we analyze the case of mutualize the people to just one train station, we notice that the success rate it's bigger, which makes complete sense because we are pushing the people to go to one place, giving fewer options, so the passenger are more forced to accept, and the maximum people on board is still really high, and the pulling rate it's even better. But again, we are forcing the passengers to do what we want in quotes, just because we have just one train station available. Can we go to the next slide, please? And when we try to focus on what happened in the off-peak hours, the first thing that we notice is that we have really, really low people using the system. So the maximum people on board is just 2 passengers and really high mileage. And this can be described as well when we see this graph in the bottom, that at the end, we are done spending a lot of time in the parking, which is one of the strong parts of the free floating. They can wait until the next reservation arrive and then be able to respond to this. What happened is that, as you can see, we have a really constrained route. So we only have 2 ways or just one way to go to the train station. And then inside the business area, we don't have 1,000 stops neither. We have a few, we select them using the business that are around the area. So at the end, if we have these constraints of hours for the train stations, and then these routes are also constraints, at the end, we are only working as a pendular service. So we are doing just back and forwards. It's one way to use the autonomous vehicles, yes, but it's not how the free floating system works in general. So we cannot see the full potential of the free floating system if we don't allow flexibility in the area. Next, please. And we wanted to push the system even more to see what will happen if we have more and more and more. What is the maximum capacity that we are able to receive in our system? And at the end, we still see that the most performant scenario, it's always the scenario we push the people to mutualize in one train station. And we have the capacity to transport almost 480 passengers. So we can put more people in the system and still be able to fulfill the need, which is a really good sign. Next, please. At the end, when we finish to analyze the different scenarios and how the free floating, the feeder are interacting and the different fleets, and if we use 1 or 2 train station, the first thing that we discover is that yes, it is necessary to have different strategies, because we are not working in the same way as a user in the peak hour and in the off-peak hour. We don't have the same tolerance, we don't have the same needs, and it's not even sometimes the same reason of the trip. So we need different operational strategies in any case. The second part is that the mutualization is really something positive for the operational point of view. For an operator, having everyone waiting in just one train station is marvelous. We have really high pulling rates. We use fewer vehicles, and everything goes well. And another conclusion that we have is that, again, as I said before, we don't need to have 20 vehicles or 50 vehicles with the same amount of seats available. We can mix and we can have a better configuration with that. So having fleets from different sizes available is something really positive for the system. So in this case, what we see that is the most optimal to do is to have 2 vehicles of 25 seats and then 1 vehicle with 50 seats. That's the best configuration. Next for the animation, please. So the limits at the end, just to let you know and to be completely transparent, the consequence of mutualize people in one single train station, we cannot say how are going to be for the user perspective, because we couldn't go to this part of the generalized cost. How is the cost for them if they go one station further? So this is still an open question. How is the user consequence of doing this operational choice? Also, we did some hypotheses about how the people will react, what are the tolerance to wait, but maybe in reality, there is bigger or there is less. So we need to test to see. And also, this is a big struggle for most of the operation part. We need to find a balance between user satisfaction and available resources, because we can provide more times, more departure times, which means more vehicles. And maybe passengers are going to be happier, but still have a cost. So we need to find the good balance. And in this case, is the configuration that I showed before. And as I said before as well, if we have no constraints in a free-floating system, it works really well. If we start to put barriers everywhere, it's not free anymore. So the true potential of this configuration, it will be seen in the future when we have allowed to use all the roads available in the area. For the moment, it's not the best idea to use a free-floating, at least from the current situation. And I will let the floor to Gav right now, so we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, thank you. So what we've actually spoken so far about is the fact that operating a DRT services around those 3 routes is certainly plausible. So actually, we could go tomorrow and start operating that service, and there'll be a benefit to that. Secondly, that when AV technology comes along in the short term, so in the next year, 2 years, that we could run it under autonomous vehicle level 4 technology. That's what we believe from our AV partners, the roadmap supports, and vehicles would be equipped with that AV technology in readiness. Under the legalities of the Automated Bill Act, then we still need to have a supervisor on board, a safety driver on board, but obviously that's going to go away with time. So what we're seeing here is a progressive nature that actually we can start to do this tomorrow. We can then automate it in the future with a safety driver. We can then go to remote assist, and then we can then go to even the next step. So there's a real way forward here, and this is really focusing on the pitch for the project and also the competition, which is about removing barriers to move forward in commercializing autonomous vehicles for mass transit. But when we pitched this project, we start to go, well, the return on investment, okay, well, so we can look at the demand analysis we've just done, we can put a price on there, we can start to work that out. But actually what we really wanted to do, well, take a step back and say, actually, if I was a local authority, where do I start? Is automating my bus service right? Actually trying to go and get a justification, even like an internal business case, just to look at the feasibility to start off with, might well be a problem, because actually this might not be, we've just chosen this triangular route scenario of the 3 routes, but actually, what about the other 3 or 4? What about the other thousands of kilometres of routes within my county? So what we started to do, okay, well, actually, let's start to break it down and go, so what's the possibility of automation Bearing in mind that I don't have the budget to investigate the feasibility study. So what we've done is we've created a very basic return on investment calculator that has some assumptions as of today. Well, in fact, actually, they were as of earlier in the year. And then you providing inputs that you would know will then start to look at whether it was economically viable. So the return on investment calculator, and I'll talk about it in a minute, basically takes you through certain scenarios of operating expense, capital expense, operating expense, and then based on some assumptions, then basically gives you a return on investment, and then starts to break that down. That return on investment toolkit then suggests a cost saving. And from that, hopefully, you can then use that to then start to go, well, actually, there is some merit in this. I need to look further. And that's when I'll then start to do a proper feasibility study. So that's when you would then evaluate the economics and the demand analysis as Padam and Siemens have. That's where you would then survey the route in the way that Fusion have. And then you would then package that up into a feasibility prospectus. And hopefully that gets you much further down. So this is the process that we're sort of suggesting. Obviously, it doesn't have to be with us necessarily. I shouldn't say that, but it doesn't have to be. But we think this is a good step forward, and therefore the return on investment calculator, CCAV have really taken a bit of a shine to it, and we're looking at actually how we can roll that out in a broader sense, because at the moment it's a little bit. And it's a little bit, you have to come talk to me and then I'll let you have access to it. And there's reasons for that. I'll just talk about that on the next slide. But all of that stacks up to, the next step is then you can then move towards a feasibility study, a pilot, a trial, or funding externally from others. So what we've built is we've built a return on investment calculator that takes on some assumptions. So this is just a couple of screen grabs of basically what it does. So this is cost information. So if you've got the full cost of the vehicle, you can put that in there. The residual value of the vehicle after service, how many years the service is going to run. So basically, if I'm running an 8 years service and the cost of the vehicle is X, then what's the residual value at the end of that? We've put in some costs there to make that vehicle self-driving. Now, they're grayed out because you don't have the flexibility to change those. I'm going to say those numbers are wrong, which is a bit weird because I've put the numbers in there, but the numbers are wrong. And the reason being is actually the autonomous vehicle technology suppliers are relatively secretive, and good reason. It's a very competitive market and they're all moving forward in their own trajectory of businesses. And therefore they're not necessarily open to share what those are. And you can't kind of go and get a list price of what does it cost for an autonomous vehicle. So what we've done is we've put some larger safe numbers in there just to make sure that actually the testing of the calculator itself works out correct. Now, we invite AV operators to work with us because actually, if we get more input, then we can reflect that and change the numbers. But likewise, also, we can very quickly make this your own return on investment calculator with your own specifics, and then effectively white label it for you if you wanted to, if you're interested. So do contact us if you want. Next slide, please. Okay, so there is a slide that I've missed, and apologies, or it's gone through 2 slides. But basically, on the service design, that is where you start to put in, well, how many buses do I want? What is the operating service? Is it 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours? So that's where you start to put the various different elements of the service design. But actually, if you go back 1 slide, please. So that's where you put in the service design. Then there'll be some assumptions around savings, around how many buses can be operated with a remote assist support. Remote assist, some people might know it as teleoperation, but I think the industry is coming to terms with the fact that it's not teleoperation because we're not talking about taking control of the vehicle. What we're talking about is a operator sitting there as a supervisor, watching the autonomous vehicle traverse the roads. When it comes to an obstacle, it will then recommend the right approach to take that. So it'll be able to see that because of the cameras on the vehicle. It'll be able to sense the potential problems that might well be there. And then it will then recommend through a series of a series of options, how it should then go past that obstacle. That's what we believe is the approach that the autonomous vehicle will take, and how the technology is going to develop in the near field short term. Obviously, bearing in mind at the moment, the next couple of years, as I've said, we are talking about a teleoperator, a safety driver in the vehicle anyway. So it's slightly irrelevant in the next couple of years, but over time it will go forward. And we're really talking about mass transit vehicles, so bus control rather than cruise cabs and Uber cabs, etc., that sort of thing. We're actually talking about larger passenger vehicles in this way. Okay, back to the next slide, please. So to test this, what we did was we did an experiment. We started to say, well, actually, if I start with one bus and 7-hour service, then it effectively there's no benefit. But when you start to then change that, so one bus, 3 buses, 7-hour service, 3 buses, 9-hour service. When you start to go forward and then start to increase how many buses and the level of service that you want to provide, then that's when you start to get savings. So you get the benefit of the capital expense, setting up the system, setting up the infrastructure, relevant to then the benefit of then operating it itself. And that's really because you're taking out the human driver, so you're taking out the employment costs in automating it. And that's obviously what goes back to one of the big reasons for why we're looking at automation, is to actually, one, make it safer, reduce the wear and tear, so make it more feasible and economically viable to operate these services. 3, to actually reduce emissions, because if you've got a smoother drive, less stop-start, then obviously that reduces emissions. But we're actually talking about electric vehicles as well in this. But then also reducing that operating cost, because that's where the big issue as far as commercialization of running mass transit systems are. Next slide, please. And then experiment 2, we started to put in the different routes. So I've just shown route 3 here. So we've got the CapEx costs, the OpEx costs. And again, these are based on some of the assumptions, and they're not necessarily right, because they're information that we could find. So some of the information that goes into the operating and CapEx costs was provided by Hertfordshire County Council. Some of it is through literature review on the web, and some of it is based on industry understanding that we have. But as you can see, there's a saving if we choose to do an ICE, so internal combustion engine automation versus human driver. And then there's also a saving if we go to EV, so electric vehicle. So really and truly is we're probably going to skip the ICE, but what we wanted to do, and the way the calculator breaks it down, is it allows you to go from a human vehicle bus driven system to a human vehicle petrol diesel bus to a automated electric bus. And so it takes you, if you like, through that journey. And what we've done is we've provided some indicative cost per mile based on the route, the miles in the route, and how many miles we do per day in the scenarios as the outcome from the PADAM simulation. Next slide. And so I think I've pretty much talked about the slide, but this is on the basis, I think we're probably going to give you access to these, or it'll be a recording. This is so you can actually see it in black and white. As I've said, removing the cost of a human driver and replacing it with an automated system provides a better ROI over the life of the project. OpEx obviously goes down, as you would expect. CapEx is obviously higher, but then you do have that benefit later on. And we see the different observations between EV to EV and EV to ICE comparison. Hopefully that makes sense. I know I've whistled through that last little bit quite quickly, but really is just to be that the return investment is based that first step. Should I even be looking at the feasibility of automating a bus service? Should I be looking at, and if so, where do I start? And that's really where we've aimed the return investment calculator. So if you want to have a try with your own numbers, obviously the more accurate the information you put in there, the better the results will be, or the more accurate the results will be. So if you know precise information about the running and the cost of a bus, and all the costs and inputs that you're able to put in there, then you will get a better answer out at the end of the day. And that's how we've designed it. We are going to do another revision in the future. That's planned. We're probably going to make a more complicated version of it, but we're starting where we are now because that's the position to try and remove this obstacle so we can actually get, commercializing automated bus systems in a much more mass market. Next slide, please. So I can't remember who's going to present this slide. James, was it yourself?
It was. Yes, Gav, that's right. So I think hopefully those of you in the audience have kind of understood the workflow of how we look to tackle this project, and also some of the methodology and sort of the results that we've been able to share. And I think it's kind of now what happens next. This is always the question when we're talking about not just autonomous vehicles, but future mobility and projects involving technology in general. So I think, where we see the things going now is really about maintaining that momentum that our consortium has developed this year. So I think we want to kind of demonstrate what we found. We've, got the partners there, and we want to see the real need of the area where we found. And we're in the process of publishing an article, and we'd like to thank our partners there at the University of Hertfordshire have worked with us on that lit review and benchmarking, and then sharing, like we're doing with you today, the information about our experience, what we can do, where we think there's room for improvements, how we think we need to address different use cases and their respective feasibilities. And I think, we're now at this time where there's been some other opportunity openings within Innovate UK for autonomous vehicles, partly through some of the changes in law and things like the autonomous vehicle bill that received royal assent sort of end of May, early June. And there's sort of a real push now with a number of actors in the market and the players there to really sort of drive this forward, and actually also the funding and the related economic support to help really make this a possibility. Next slide, please. And so we'll now just come to some Q&A section. I know we've seen that there are some in the chat box, and I think, if I can invite Gav and Siri back to join me on this, and we have a couple of questions, both that were sent through in advance and also those that were sent through in real time. And if you have any others, please feel free to write them in the box, and we will address them. And I think perhaps one of the first ones that has popped up in the chat box, Gav, if you're able to touch on this, is about the operation on a public highway for these sorts of vehicles and the barriers or enablers that we can have to do that.
Yeah, so I'll come back off video now. Yeah, so thanks, James. So I think I pretty much covered this actually in the presentation. I think this was a question that was asked before the event started. So we obviously we're going through an automated bill, which is making great progress through legislation. The reality is that there's a technology roadmap that we're following as well. So right now we believe that buses with automated technology will be, if you like, mainstream available. I think at the end of 2025, early 2026. They will still need a safety driver on board as far as legislation goes, I think, as I understand it. And then when that goes away, then we obviously have the remote assist that then kind of comes in after that. And at the same time as obviously, the technology in the roadmap continues to be invested in the AEV system so that we can get more to that close point where, more miles have been driven, and we can go to driverless mass transit as we go forward. But again, I go back to the question is we can operate this, from tomorrow with a human driver, because that's where we were really focusing on the commercial aspects of operating a DRT service in this area, and then moving towards automated technology. So we see it as a phased approach. That I think it really importantly is that investment isn't it's not a dead end branch. The investment can be step by step as we go forward. So I think that's where we are right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Gav. And I think there was also a question said beforehand around what is the future for both autonomous vehicles and also DRT within the new government. And I think it's a bit sort of what Gav has touched upon there. We're in the progress of seeing new bills and new laws coming to fruition in the sort of short to medium term. And I think also we are seeing things around like the new buses bill, which will be published I think early next year, and things around the BSIP funding, which was made available a couple of weeks ago. Those things are sort of, really, really positive, both for regular public transport, but also these more innovative means, such as demand responsive transport, which Padan Mobility is involved in various other UK schemes, but also, that's in partnership with these Innovate UK projects and competitions are really helping, push that innovation forward to help get sort of UK PLC back to where that statement from sort of early 2019 was around being a world leading centre for autonomous vehicles and transport excellence. And I think we're really starting to see the signs sort of being set in place to help enable that to be possible. And another question I think that we just had was around the scalable option for a larger network. And I think, Gav, you mentioned that briefly around the ROI calculator that you have and sustainability. And I think regarding a solution to reduce car ownership, I think, Azira, you touched a bit about that on the methodology. I don't know if you want to just touch a bit more in detail around, how you saw that going and the steps to enable that to really make people, leave their cars at home and get on something new.
Yeah, one thing that we noticed it when we were doing this study, and even with other projects that we have, is that we need to be competitive to the private car if we want the people to switch. So as I said, one of the things that we think that we need to tackle, it's first of all the frequency. We need to be able to guarantee a good quality of service, and we need to guarantee that the people are gonna have an option to be transported after they start the trip. Arriving to the train station and having this connection is a key point. So for us, the most important thing is that we need to see what the car is capable of doing and how we can improve this with the whole of the system. And it can be thanks to saving money. It can be thanks to saving time, which actually is also money. Time is money. So yeah, it's to find a balance between all these elements and to provide an offer that is capable of really fulfill this need that today we are not capable of.
Thank you, Azir. And just another question from the chat there from Steve Kendall that says, trusting the tech, knowledge of the capability and exploration of opportunities are all challenges, but why is it that so many struggle to design an effective deployment and business model for this capability? I guess, Gav, perhaps coming to you on this one, is this around the fact that there is not the return on investment feasibility? Is it a bit that the maturity of actually putting something live into operation? I know someone else in the chat has mentioned the project in Didcot, or is it a combination of sort of all of the above and a few other items in terms of actually just picking a place where there is enough critical mass to enable the mass transit to do what it needs to do best?
Oh, well, I mean, there's so many factors in there. I mean, I think logically, what we've perhaps we've taken an easy route out in that we've looked at where, first off, where we knew that there was a problem as far as current public transport options. Two, that there was large demand. Three, that we felt, knowing the road system already, that the roads were potentially viable with autonomous vehicle technology as it is today. So we kind of chosen somewhere where actually we were backing a winning horse, if that makes sense. But I think that's where you kind of have to look at it from a wider perspective, or where you do look at it from a wider perspective. Why they're failing? I think we've got to be careful that pilots aren't done in pilots are done with real world problems. I think pilots in the past have been focusing. I've got to be very careful because I'll probably shoot myself in the foot here, and I'll probably get criticised for it as well. But I think pilots in the past have been looking at the technology rather than the business case and the opportunity and actually the need. So I think this round of the competition was trying to focus a bit more on the need, on the assumption that the technology was moving forward already, and it would come together. So if you then focus on the need, it very much comes back to, well, what makes a good operational public transport system? That's probably more the question. Because automation will reduce in costs as we start to get it into mass systems. If you go and say, I want to buy 30 buses that are all automated, it's going to be a lot less per unit than it is if I just buy 2 or 3. and that gives stability in the market to be able to invest more in reducing some of the systems some of the things that are coming up in the questions. It gives that longevity to the technology providers. So I think there's multiple factors, but I think that's where we now need to swap, and we need to go actually which routes can either be moved from existing to automation to save costs to make them more economically viable, which routes are underly served, or where is the demand that I can actually just do this and get that shuttle type environment back. So I think the answer is right now to me would be go and do some focus on some quick wins. Let's get some trajectory going, and then we can then start to tackle some of the harder issues as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And another question there from John Lua, perhaps at Ziri. This is one for yourself and I around the lack of drivers putting passengers off, particularly at night with antisocial behaviour. So we, at Siemens and Badam, we run some live autonomous vehicle services in continental Europe. I think sort of a broad point before I let Ziri sort of talk about how we manage passenger interactions. Across DRT in general, and indeed some of the autonomous DRTs which we work on, we see really quite low levels of antisocial behavior, in part because the users who are booking and using the service, we have available information as to who they are, where they're traveling to and from, and the times, so that we are doing them. But I think also in the absence of a driver, we also have several ways in which we built our technology to sort of monitor that aspect. So Azir, I hand over to you to describe that.
Yeah. Right now, we are working in a European project named Ultimo, and the goal is absolutely the thing that is described in this question. So one thing that we notice is that once we take off this human person that it's inside the vehicle, what happened next? Actually, driving is one of the tasks, of the multiple tasks that a driver is doing. He's offering a service as people welcoming the other passengers, explaining. He's also responsible supervising everything that is related to the ticketing, the security and safety of the passengers. He's the one who does the constant when a crash happens and the insurance needs to be involved, etc., etc. So once we notice that the role of the driver is more than just drive, what we're trying to do today with the Ultimo project is actually developing these around services. And I saw a lot of questions in the chat about the technical capabilities of the autonomous vehicles today. And I understand that it's a struggle because we have seen a lot of tests in the past years, and I completely understand the feeling. But we cannot stay in the pessimist part of the situation that it's right now. And we need to focus on what happened next. Because if tomorrow we have a vehicle that is capable of doing anything that we want in the roads, but we don't have the services that goes with, as you mentioned in the question of antisocial behavior, the service is not going to work. So we can start working in the services inside the vehicle, and it's going to work for any vehicle. So one example that I can give is, for example, we are working in counting passengers. How we can assure that we have 5 bookings and 5 persons inside the vehicle. Today is the driver that counts. How we can assure that passenger pay the ticket. It is a struggle also for the buses today. So we are working in the Ultimo project to develop these inside vehicle services that are complementing what the driver is supposed to do. And even if today we cannot go as fast as we would like or doing everything that we will desire in the roads, we need to tackle these issues as well in parallel, and we can do it today. So when the technology arrives, we're going to be ready to implement directly.
Thank you, Atsiri. And I think that also kind of links to the point raised there by Ed Holden around, where the bus or manufacturing market is at the moment versus going in the next, decade or so around being an early adopter and bespoke vehicles versus, retrofitting, I guess. And I think we don't have our sort of operational partners in Fusion here with us, but I think broadly what we start to see is there are a more consolidated number of partners, and it's a bit like the EV space, I guess. We are no longer seeing retrofitted vehicles with autonomous capabilities. We are rather seeing, in the same way with electric vehicles, you're seeing from the ground up electric platform vehicles being built. We are actually seeing vehicles being addressed by default to have autonomous capabilities, and it's one of the things where I don't think we are at the early adopter niche stage. We are starting to now see the sort of regular production of when a vehicle is designed, can it be able to be fitted with autonomous capabilities, whether that's a manufacturer in the UK or manufacturer abroad, but actually, from the outset thinking there is a potential that this vehicle would be needed as an autonomous form in the next, lifetime of its service. So actually, how do we do that from the start? And another question there around the impact and sort of reduction feasibility of the congestion resulting from the AV use. I don't think, Azuri, we address congestion directly in the study, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we would expect to see is hopefully the service would be sort of committed to a live service of maybe 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. We want to see a longer duration of test option for the service to enable a real sort of result to be seen.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Unfortunately, we only could focus in the micro scale. So what the DRT is gonna behave. So the simulator is all around all this specific mode of transportation and not the interaction of this mode of transportation with the rest of the ecosystem, like the macro bar. So yeah, we only focus on how the DRT will behave. And it's true that it's missing how it's gonna affect the others, not only the rest of the drivers, but also the other passengers of the regular bus lines, or maybe the people that used to use bikes or something like that. Yeah, it's something that it's not in the focus of the feasibility study, but it is something that needs to be considered in a second stage.
Excellent. Thank you, Azuri. And I think I just saw one question in the chat there from Madeline. So about the passenger wait time as a constraint, and people not wanting to wait around to board a service. So to kind of address what this means is we are kind of saying if someone arrives at the train station at sort of 11 a.m., if we're putting a 10 minutes, passenger wait time, we know that, or we sort of induce the behavior, so to speak, of if they are looking to then grab a journey, if the journey that they want to take is 11:11 and beyond, then they would not be sort of applicable to take our journey. We are really focusing on, okay, someone arrives off the train at 11 a.m. They want to get into the office. If the first proposition we are offering them through this shuttle is within, between 11 and 11:10, they will take it. If it's beyond that, then, we would assume that they may take something else. It's again back to what Adziri was saying around the frequency today of the bus service, the fixed bus service between the two locations is kind of not satisfactory. It's up to 2 or 3 times the direct distance by car, trying to address that customer behavior. And we know for some areas it may be 10 minutes, for some areas it may be 20 minutes, and some, if it's raining and it's dark, but it may be 5 minutes. So we have to take a relatively small assumption window, but we know there will be some levels of uncertainties within that as well. Azira, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that and how we can adjust that going forward, and the success rate that would be impacted.
No, yeah, completely true, everything that you say. And at the end, something that it's also really tricky is that the simulator take on consideration everything that happens in the day. So we have to make an average, as James already said. And the reality is that in the peak hour, we don't have the same tolerance than the off-peak hour. So maybe in the off-peak hour, we are willing to wait, I don't know, 30 minutes, and it's not a problem. But when we have to go to work, people have really tight schedules. So if we are not capable to compete, for example, with a taxi, they will take a taxi. Even if it's free, the service, for example, or if it costs just £2, I don't know, but it's a matter of time, and they need to go to the office at time. And if they arrive and there is no option, they're going to take the option that takes us into the time that they have to be there. So that's the thing with the waiting time. It can be a constraint if we don't guarantee that the people still in the opportunity window that we have this tolerance. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And then another question we had from before, and please do keep the questions coming in the chat and in the box, was around, perhaps for you, Atsuri, is as a PTA, how do I get involved? How do I find out if this project is right for me? Can I, understand the opportunities, understand the competitions, whether that's through Innovate UK? What's an opportunity for a PTA who's got a test bed that could be feasible for AV?
I think that the first thing that you need to do as a PTA is to listen to the people that lives in your area. So listen to your users, and once you identify a need, the next thing to do is to communicate with the person that can help that it can, in this case, it can be us, for example, to build this consortium, to see who are the right people to build this ecosystem. So one thing that we need is someone's going to provide the orchestration. We need a leader, we need an operator, we need a manufacturer. And with these key elements together, the next thing to do is to find a funding. And fundings, hopefully right now, there are different scales of opportunities. We have opportunities in the level of the European Union. Now that England gets back to the Horizon project, there is also the possibility of having the Interrect, which is another scale of funding. There is national fundings. There is also sometimes like regional funding. So don't hesitate to look in the different websites that propose the government to see what are the opportunities that are open. You build your project with your partners or with different levels of engagement. It can be subcontractors as well, which is the case of Padam. And then you postulate, you submit your proposal, and if it makes sense for everyone, it's going to be approved, and then it's just time to work. So yeah, first thing, just tackle the need that you have, and then we can help.
Perfect. And then perhaps just one, we touched on it briefly earlier from Hans about the scalability for a larger network and reducing car ownership. I guess, Gav, the ROI calculator, you had some assumptions there around the scalability of it, but is it kind of a longer term need to potentially have this across a region, not just a small number of routes? And how long do you think it needs in terms of a firm commitment to kind of enable that modal shift from private car?
I love the way you add to the question to make it even more difficult for me.
That's what I'm here for.
Very good, thank you. Well, I guess it's quite a large question. I mean, scalable, but it's no pun intended. But it is quite a large question and quite wide. I mean, certainly, obviously, the demand analysis and running a DRT, then obviously, yes, that can be done at scale and can be done much wider. In fact, that's where we've highlighted in the presentation today is that actually, probably better than just doing what I call more of a fixed direct route. So that flexibility is the case. Obviously, the approach we've taken is to survey the limited routes that we then focused on, and you could survey a greater, wider area to see whether find the obstacles. I think, to be honest, once you've done the survey, or used the level 4 vehicle to do a survey, so that quite technical approach, you can, and the understanding that we've gained as a consortium through the project, we could drive multiple routes of the network and give our view of whether they are suitable or applicable or going to require a lot of infrastructure change and capital cost. So and that's not necessarily a critique assessment, it's just an approach. But yes, I think if ultimately, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve a service that meets the expectation of the consumer, both in timeliness and affordableness and directness, which is what DRT then really is trying to focus on. And so if you turn it around that perspective, yes, public transport, because that's what we're talking about, could be a better option than car ownership. Why would I need a car? Why would I want to park a car at a car park and then and pay that price if I've got a service that meets my expectation? But with that becomes scale, and if you do it over a wide area, it becomes the technical feasibility of driving automated vehicles on those roads, which right now is where it is, but will change. And we have got really complicated roads. If we just talk a little bit about some of the route that we've focused on, some of the barriers aren't necessarily physical restrictions. They are parked cars in urban environments and therefore having to straddle a white line. Where is the rule on that as far as highways go, legality and the automated vehicle technology? But but that is brief, and if you like, those are obstacles that the technology will be able to overcome through the safety driver and the remote assist, and over time will be hopefully improved. Likewise, you could improve it more radically with better infrastructure. So I think there's lots of different options, and I'll stop it there because otherwise I'll just end up rambling. But I think it is scalable, but we have to get the commercial sort of reasons behind it, which is where we've tried to spin it round a little bit rather than focus on the AV tech in this particular project.
Perfect. Thanks, Gavin. Just this one here from Sven around the hurdles you see when it comes to continuous funding streams and the right steps on a legislation point. I guess this is perhaps for us here with the Siemens Padam focus. I think the hurdles around continuous funding is you require a certain level of result and a certain level of commitment to keep that funding alive. You want to see things moving in the right direction. You want to see positive reinforcement of what the technology is able to do and the results being seen to sort of progressively perhaps lead towards that scalability across a town, a city or a region, but also modal shift. But then I think the sort of catch-22 of that funding stream is you may not see that if it's just a 6 or 12-month funding announcement. We understand within sort of the research is that modal shift can take 24, 36 months at a minimum to start to see some signs of coming to fruition. So although we may only need, and we accept that these services are at the moment a little bit more expensive than the conventional modes, but we do need that sort of longer term funding stream to kind of enable us to understand, is this actually feasible and viable as a long or mid-term project, and that would then hopefully drive the steps to be taken on the legislative point. And I think to come back to what we touched on earlier, that autonomous vehicle bill in the UK is kind of a really big step in the right direction. Perhaps, Azuri, some of the projects that we work on in continental Europe through Ultimo or the other partnerships we have, how do you see that going forward from a shuttle to a bus or to something slightly different?
Something that we see specifically in the Ultimo project is this part of continuation, because the Geneva site, for example, it was part of another project before, and what they achieve is not staying there. So they want to continue and to progress and to do more, and that's why this model of European projects having this follow-ups after. We have, for example, the show project that just finished, but it doesn't mean that all the sites are just going to close. So at the end, the bases are there. And one important thing that we need to do is exchange, because the information is there, the experience is there. We don't need to repeat. And I'm willing that UK wanted to learn as well from the other countries that already try and fail some things, because we learn from that. And you have all the reports, and we can just share this information. And at the end, we have the same goal, which is using this for public transport, as Gav already said. It is not for individual use. It is not for doing robotaxis. We know that there are other countries doing that very well. And okay for them, but this is not the vision from Europe. So once that other countries already know how to handle this can be extrapolated. And now, for example, Germany and France, they take a move forward in the legislation. So just look at your neighbors. Maybe some of the things that they are doing, they are useful as well for your case. But I'm not saying that everything is going to be a copy-paste, because you have different conditions. Every country has different conditions, but we can use some of them as inspiration. So don't be passive, just don't wait for the others to do things, but learn from the things that are there and then move from that. That will be the best approach, even from the legislation part.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to add to this, so CCAV did phase 1 of mass transit, which was very much about segregated routes. That was subscribed, and there was about 6 or 7 feasibility studies that were undertaken. This was a competition which was phase 2 of mass transit, and they opened it up to non-segregated routes. And they've just now released a further competition, which is about further feasibility studies, which is, again, trying to create a funnel of opportunity for pilots and trials, so that they can then follow up the ones that are hopefully more successful and more likely to be commercialized and taken up outside of the pilots themselves to then do pilots. So that's my view. That's my take of the how they're doing it. So they're trying to create a funnel of opportunity that then gradually comes down to then more and more pilots. And as you do that, and if you expand that, then you can then get more, and then it goes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really important. So if anybody wants to drop us an email, I can drop them a link to the competition if they're interested on the feasibility studies. That's number one. Even if you don't involve us, that's fine. Just I'm happy to do that as part of a service, because CCAV have been a great facilitator of this, and we want to support what they're trying to achieve. we've also got the fact that we're very much now talking about integrated transport with the new Labour government, and again that pulls in because this is very much kind of fits in that roadmap as such. So CCAV are waiting for the comprehensive spending review, the second version, if you like, in early 2025, to see what funding they have past this next phase of competitions. And again, I think that's really every conversation I've had in the last 3-6 months with them has been about commercializing the opportunities, building that mass market, etc., etc. So again, the return investment toolkit, and again, it's not to publicize that, not to push that because it's my own thing, but it's literally just a case of if we can use that at the top of the funnel, then that's great, because then the whole industry moves forward with us, and that benefits us all, and also it benefits consumers.
Perfect. Thanks, Gavin. I think just a point there, to follow up about Sven, he just commented again around the results. I think that's what Azir and Gav addressed, and I think it's also around, there needs to be some level of acceptance that with new projects, some things will not always go quite to plan, and we need to sort of own that and address that, and take the learnings and the best practice, like Gavin Azir mentioned, for future times. And just the point there around from Ed Holden around the Waymo route. So I think as Gav mentioned, this is kind of a mass transit focused thing as opposed to a robo taxi point. So I think with the sort of feasibility experience that they have done in California and Miami, I think we kind of understand and watch how they do things, but the sort of the direct replicability of what a Waymo or another autonomous sort of robo taxi provider is doing, it's hard to kind of directly correlate that to the sort of mass transit approach we're doing, where we're kind of looking at sort of larger vehicles and sort of a slightly different style of infrastructure. Gavin, I don't know if you have anything else to add on sort of how that sits in those two worlds of Waymo versus what we're doing.
Maybe something I will add, it's something that Gav said earlier about the secrets that they have, the autonomous vehicles, even for the prices. We don't have a list of prices, and we don't have a methodology open to the public. So it's really a black box sometimes. And even for us as technical partners that we need the connections with the vehicle to achieve to have a service, it can be difficult sometimes, all these agreements of confidentiality. So I cannot assure how they handle the feasibility studies itself. What I know is that the routes are not the same, and the routes in Europe in general, there are more arrow, so that can be a struggle. And we have a lot of more different ecosystem. So we have a lot of pedestrians, we have a lot of cyclist people. So that's something that the US doesn't have really, and it can be really tricky when it happens for the autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, agreed. And I think perhaps probably the key similarity that we look to have when we assess, what they're doing versus what we're doing is just a very broad point of, we want to see, more successful rollouts of autonomous vehicle services, whether that's a robotaxi or sort of a mass transit bus or on-demand style of service, because I think that again sort of levels up the entire sort of industry as kind of showing that yes, this is the direction that we can go forward in to make things more present in the process. I'm just thinking if there's any other questions, but we are sort of getting close to our time, so I'd just like to thank everyone. And I just see a message there. Replacing non-AV cars with personal AV cars does not give us a great deal of benefit. It will drive congestion and energy use. I think that's a good point. I think we are not kind of seeing or anticipating the switch perhaps that we see in terms of policy change to drive people to take an electric vehicle instead of an ICE vehicle. I think it's more around how can we enable a wider use in a system. Gav, I saw you're typing something, so I wonder if you want to butt in quickly.
No, I was going to say, I think my understanding is no one's going to have a personal AV. It's always going to be a shared option. I mean, that's the point. I don't think there's any economics for you to have a personal AV. there is that intermediate step where you've got a level 2 or level 3 where you've got driver assistance within it. So, lane, collision avoidance, lane keeping, that sort of thing. But when you actually get to proper, automated vehicles, it's a shared experience. So it's the robo taxi. But we were really focused on mass transit because actually, mass transit is the hallowed ground, isn't it? It's like if we can get more people onto a shared experience and more people onto one vehicle, regardless of whether it's human or automated, then we remove the reliance on cars. So that's where we need to be focusing on. That's where we focused on mass transit within this project.
Excellent. Thank you, Gav. So yes, thank you very much. That sort of bring to an end our discussion around what we've done as a project, but also answering some of your questions around what's next for the project, how does it go forward, and hopefully we've addressed some of those questions. I think we're really quite excited around the opportunities that the CCAV departments are bringing forward, and also through Innovate UK, what's really possible. I'd just like to thank Atziri and Gav for joining us and presenting their studies, and there will of course be further details around future competitions. So keep an eye on them and where they go next. And also in addition to that, we will sort of provide you with some more contact information as a follow-up to this webinar, where you understand a bit more about what we're doing, some links around there, and where to go next. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I've been James West, and I'd like to also thank Atziri and Gav as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.